The fall of the pigeon. I don't know anything about this topic, but I was listening to a podcast yesterday, Freakonomics, highly recommend. If you haven't checked it out, it's worth it. And they're talking about the rat and how it has been maligned over the years. And one of the topics that came up was pests. And one of the pests that also came up was the pigeon. And apparently the pigeon used to be this super great bird that everybody loved because it was super useful and helpful and nice. But now it's a rat with wings. And I don't know why, but that just sounded super interesting to me. So I'm going to look into it today. We'll see how accurate that depiction actually is. The tragedy of the most hated bird. Calling a bird a pigeon is like calling them a goose. It's an entire range of animal. It's not even their real name. It should be doves. Before they were flying vermin, we bred them for food, for communication, and even for beauty. ? They were pets and livestock. Pigeon domestication is over 10,000 years ago. They were domesticated, but it's hard to pinpoint when they were actually the actual fossil record because their bones are so brittle and tiny. I guess bird bones are just fragile in general because they're porous. It's kind of funny to think about because we eat like so much chicken, but like just think about eating a pigeon. I don't know, you shoot it, you pluck all the feathers out, you cook it up. I mean, it's meat, and if you have like a ton of them, I guess it would be a pretty good meat source, but it's the idea of eating a pigeon doesn't sound great, but back in the day, excellent meat bird. What's the difference between like a regular pigeon and a homing pigeon? I feel like, can you just use any old pigeon as a homing pigeon? Because I think the idea with homing pigeons is that they'll go back to where they came from, right? Like you can just take them somewhere and then release them, and then when you release them, they go back to where they were born or something. That does look like a pigeon, like a normal modern pigeon. So this map is showing like the native range in the dark red and the feral population in the light red and the pink. All over the place. Interesting distinction between a wild animal and a feral one is that a wild animal evolved or like grew naturally in the wild, and the feral one was domesticated and then released and now lives on its own. So apparently these guys are the wild rock doves, but they are in danger of dying out because the feral regular type pigeons, the gray and like mottled ones, colorful ones, have been interbreeding with them so much that it's going to be hard to find a pure blood rock pigeon pretty soon. Look at this woman just hanging out with her pigeon. Back in the day, so like there was a dove that was used in Noah's Ark to like find land, but what is the difference between pigeons and doves? Did they say? I thought they were saying that they're basically the same bird. Anyways, back in ancient China, they used to represent longevity and fidelity. It's all a matter of perspective. Invasive species alert. The house sparrow. I love it when immorality is ascribed to animals. Link to your studies. I want to learn more about your studies. Oh, this is what I heard referenced in the podcast I was listening to, where he went through a bunch of New York Times articles and analyzed how perception of the pigeon descended in the public eye over time. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, most people didn't really care, but then in this time period, the publicity had a turning point when 2 people died, and it was blamed because the pigeons were spreading disease. So they're basically like disease transmission through pigeon feces is super uncommon if you're scared about that kind of thing. The only threat that might make it, the only way it might be a threat is if you're coming to an excessive contact with the pigeon feces, but cleaning them off your windowsill doesn't count as excessive contact. It's got to be more than just cleaning it off the windowsill. I feel like this is probably the real problem with pigeons. The pigeon droppings can disfigure statues and clog air conditioning intakes. I mean, they're kind of messy, I feel like, is the largest problem. I've never really thought about them in the context of like spreading disease or whatever, but they are messy, especially if there's a lot of them. So it's kind of funny. Like the podcast that I was listening to was talking a lot about how like pests are only pests because we've labeled them as such, because they're just doing their natural thing and we're annoyed because they're messing up our space, our like protected space. They're eating our crops. They're pooping on our buildings. But I feel like a lot of the time, if there's a lot of them, they're actually causing like real problems. Where, I mean, at the very least, they're annoying. In our city, like in my town, there is a Starbucks, and right next to the Starbucks, there is a group of chickens that have been allowed to kind of just like grow and spread. And there's a massive amount of chickens that live right next to the Starbucks, and they're always crowing and getting up in people's business or chasing people through the parking lot. And it's like an actual nuisance. So are the pests, are they just doing their chicken thing, or are they actually pests? Let's look at the study where he tracked like the fall of the pigeon from grace over the course of like New York Times articles. Why do we keep wanting to spell pigeon with a D? I might need to look into pests a little bit further and see like what actually makes a pest, and is it how many animals have been unjustly labeled pests and how many are justly labeled pests. Also, you know what could be interesting is looking into invasive species, because that's an interesting topic as well. It didn't really talk about it, but the sparrow is an invasive species, and it sounded like they were a pretty big problem back then. But then I heard something about how they killed off, there was like some kind of smear campaign propaganda where they were like, go after the sparrows, and so everybody went and started hunting sparrows, and then the locust population got out of control. I want to look into that too. Because if they're an invasive species, how was the locust population kept under control before they were there? Yikes, that's a lot of pigeons. I feel like the sheer number itself would be a problem. Like, are there this many pigeons in the wild? Is it normal for flocks of pigeons to get this big and this frequent? This is a Q&A. I don't want this. I want the actual study he did. Maybe this will link to it. Here we go. How pigeons became rats. Oh, you're not going to let me read it? At least I can read the abstract. Not helpful at all, abstract. Okay, so he was relying on New York Times articles from 1851 to 2006 and 51 other newspapers from 1980 to 2006 to kind of focus on the process by which pigeons as a species were problematized. Okay, so he's kind of saying that like the problem with pigeons is that they are the antithesis of our idealized metropolis, which is orderly and sanitized, with nature subdued and compartmentalized. I can kind of get on board with this, but the problem is that people are always like, or I hear this complaint a lot, that people are the pests, people are the problem. If we would just let nature get on with its way, then things would be better. But like, humans are a part of nature. We are natural beings, and this is a natural evolution of our like life cycle. So like cities are our habitat. Lots of other animals don't like other animals living in their habitats. It's a very normal part of everything, in my personal opinion. Take that with a large grain of salt, though, because I know next to nothing. That's all the time I have to look into this morning. I'll do some more research off camera and get back to you later today. Prep your brains for some sweet deets. If you were expecting to have your mind blown, then think again, because I didn't find that much. So it turns out that this topic is not as cut and dry as I had thought it was. It's kind of interesting learning about like the history, but then the history took like a turn for the not clear at all. Nobody knows what's actually going on with the pigeon. So I watched a video. Really quick, this guy, if you watched any of Casual Geographic, do yourself a favor and watch some of him. He's great. But he made a lot of points that were very interesting, but were mostly just factual, that I didn't really feel like repeating because they weren't that, they were like, oh, that's cool, that's interesting, but I don't really want to just list a bunch of facts. That's not really me. If you want to hear a bunch of facts, watch his video because he's great. So I looked up some other stuff. So I was thinking, oh, maybe I could look into like the pest notion, because in the podcast I was listening to, the woman was pretty I don't know if I'd say anti, but she was really discouraging the use of the word pest and just like labeling animals as pests, because she was saying that pests are like, usually as humans, as people, we label things that we don't really want in our lives. We label them pests, even though they were probably there to begin with before we were, even though, okay, I'll get into this later, but a lot of the species or like animals that she's talking about are invasive species. Anyways, so I was looking into it. And then I actually found her article, or I found a podcast that talked to her about her views. This was not the podcast that I listened to, but it's a different one where she's talking about it. And I could not handle it with her. I'm trying very hard to be open-minded, okay? I'm not always great at being open-minded, but I really tried hard. And so she's labeling like I think her book title is How Humans Create Animal Villains, which like the premise sounds pretty legit. Like she is saying that like not all languages have the word for pest, because not all cultures have a word for pest, because it's not like universally accepted that animals who are there when we don't want them to be are like a nuisance or considered a pest. Or like there's a lot of insects or bugs or rats or pigeons or rabbits eating crops, or like all of these things that we classically would consider pests but are actually just animals in their habitat doing their thing, and we have kind of like gotten annoyed at them because they were doing their thing in our space when we didn't want them to be. But the vibe of like animals are amazing and humans are the worst comes across real strong with this woman when she's talking, and I have a really difficult time with that. It rubs me the wrong way like every time I can hear it. So I couldn't handle it, So I went looking for a different source. But all of the topics that were like, all of the people that were kind of talking about how the pigeon has been maligned and how pests are just living in their natural habitat are all giving off that similar sort of vibe. Like humans are the enemy and like animals are the friends and let's be nice to the animals, which is like, I'm not against that. I want to see things other than like you feel bad for the animals and you hate humans. So I kind of gave up on that angle. So I started looking into the house sparrow aspect because most of the sources that I was reading about pigeons were all like, yeah, originally it was the sparrow that everybody hated, and then because they were doing a bunch of immoral things, and then the pigeon came along and became the scapegoat, the bad guy, and the sparrow kind of fell beside the wayside. So I was like, maybe I'll look into the sparrow and see what life was like for the sparrow before the pigeon came along. But all of these sources were basically useless. And then I found out that there's a little drama with the house sparrow because all these people were complaining about the sparrow being like, oh, it's taking over the habitats. Oh, they're super destructive. Oh, they're killing multiple of them will mob a nest and kill the inhabitant of the bird nest and then build the nest on top of the corpse of the previous owner. And I was like, dang. And most of them are referencing the bluebird as the one that's kind of taking the brunt of the attack of the house sparrow. But then the Smithsonian is like, no, that's not how it is at all. Like, sparrow's not that bad. Sparrow's okay. They're making all these cases for like how the sparrow is actually not that bad, how it's like a lot of the charges are trumped up. I was like, okay, well, the Smithsonian does not agree with the party line. Anyways, so I kind of gave up on that angle too, and I moved on. So I was like, what kind of, like, how can I look at this that would be interesting that's going to, like, actually get me some actual data? Because all of the sources that I'm finding are, like, either hearsay or just talking about how, like, people view the stuff. And I'm like, I want, like, actual, something concrete that I can sink my teeth into. I need some facts. So I was like, how are pigeons actually doing damage? Are the feces actually eroding things? Are they actually getting people sick? Are they actually disease carriers? And wouldn't you know it, I ran into exactly the same problem. All of the sources that were talking about how like the pigeon has been maligned are directly contradicting all of these sources. Which this one, like, I don't know who this is. Best at Pest NYC. I'm pretty sure this is a pest control site, which pretty much all of the pest control sites are like lobbying for the removal of pigeons, which is like, that's what they're going to do. It's their job. Like, you want to stay in business, right? But I'm pretty sure that this is not a rock dove, and that's not a feral pigeon. I'm pretty sure these are swapped. Also, pigeons are responsible for property damage. Their acid can damage the buildings. They're public health concerns. Large pigeon populations can create unsanitary conditions. And like all of this stuff that is like exactly the opposite of what we were just learning. The disease transmissions. Like the pigeons are, all of the sources that I was reading are like pigeons are like the least likely to get humans sick because they have this weird immune system where they are like, they can barely even transmit bird flu to other birds because their immune system is funky. And here they are like, oh, these are all the diseases and illnesses that you'll get if you like get close to a pigeon. I was like, what on earth is happening? So I looked around and all of the other sources are saying the same thing. This is another pest control service. They're also saying pigeons are a huge problem. They're all saying that pigeons can cause this disease or this sickness. I'm not even sure what this is. Histoplasmosis. Which is an infection caused by breathing in spores or fungus often found in bird and bat droppings. So I think this is, I might have mentioned this earlier, but like if you're cleaning up bird feces and you're handling them a lot, then it can be a problem. You can get this stuff in your lungs. But it's like super, according to the sources I was reading earlier, it's like super improbable that you will actually get this disease unless you're dealing with like a very large quantity of it, and like every single bird that you're dealing with has this disease or sickness, whatever it is, infection. So I don't know. So many people were like, pigeons are like the super disease carriers. They're spreading all the germs. And then Google Scholar is saying the same thing. This article was like, yeah, pigeons are a menace. There's all these diseases. They're going to be super viral. Or they spread super viral diseases. But then Science Direct was like, nah. That's whack. It's super low risk to humans unless you are immunocompromised or you're like a young child or an old person. This one too is like all of these diseases that you can get from birds. I don't know. This one was less clear. I think this one is mainly in reference to if you have birds as pets or if you're like cultivating birds and you're like on a regular basis dealing with the birds like feces and like cleaning stuff up. But even this one is saying that it's like super unlikely to actually get these things unless you're very young, you're old, or you have a compromised immune system. So like, are pigeons actually disease carriers? I have no idea. I do not know. So the next point I was looking at, I was like, well, that point is moot. So let's look into, do pigeons actually cause property damage? Guess what I found? Literally nothing. I didn't actually look in this one for very long, but it's the same exact thing. Pest control sites are saying, oh yeah, pigeons are causing a ton of damage. There's so much poop in the rafters of the houses that they're living in that they're causing cave-ins and collapses. And their poop is so acidic that it's like freaking melting faces off the statues. This one from Google Scholar was also like detailing, let's see, infrastructural damages, urban architectural problems, and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know what to believe anymore. I, I'm shook, sort of. I don't even know. I feel like I'm rooting for the pigeons because now I feel like the pest control people make me feel like it's all a scam and a gimmick, and they're just trying to get out the propaganda that the pigeon is a bad time when they're just like out there living. Also, one of the things that the pest control sites referenced was that pigeons will building their nests or whatever is clogging up airways and ducts. But apparently one of the things about pigeons is that they are originally like the rock dove, which they build their nests on rock outcropping. So as long as the rock is not slanted and the egg is going to roll off the edge of the cliff, pigeons are like super happy with just a very small amount of nest. It's like, apparently it's a common meme for people to say, look at this pigeon nest. It's like 3 twigs. Like, look at this. This is like a common meme where it's like just a couple twigs and then that's the pigeon nest. And it's like, this is not causing any ducting to get clogged up or broken unless it's like 20 years worth of pigeon nests, which I could see happening maybe. Anyways, that's all I found. That's all my notes. Let me know in the comments if you found something different or if you have any like actual sources you can cite that point to like legit data. That guy's article where he was like detailing or like chronicling the decline of pigeon perception in the public eye was like behind a paywall, so I couldn't actually look at it, and the abstract about it was extremely unhelpful. It was like super vague. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.